So we'll see your screen, and I'll give a brief introduction. So Dwayne Degler is a consultant in design for context, a company who's been an advisor to a project called the American Art Collaborative, and the Yale Center for Body Shot is part of that. The other speaker, David Newberry, is the lead developer for a number of projects at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, and is also an advisor to the American Art Collaborative project. And really briefly, the AAC started in the fall of 2015. I was going to say almost out of frustration on but how traditional search engines work when it comes to supporting research in the cultural heritage sector. And the 14 partners around the AAC, and you can find the links on the website, the AAC website there, agreed to learn and give linked data a try. So that's a very 10,000-foot view of the project, obviously, but really the idea was to gather a number of colleagues to learn and experiment with linked data. Specifically, where the ontology called the conceptual reference model comes into play. And so one part of this project is to build a search interface for those 14 data sets that have been converted to CRM-based RDF. So this is the focus of our discussion today. And with that, I think I will let Dwayne and David take on and present to all of us, right?
That sounds good. Was there anything you wanted to say about the way that the data has been gathered, or did we want to that will come up over the course of the conversation, but I didn't know whether there was anything you wanted to put into people's minds initially with that.
Yeah, that's already a good idea to spend a few minutes on this. So another partner in the project, in the AAC project, is the University of Southern California, the Institute for Science Information, who is actually gathering raw data sets from all 14 institutions, 13 actually because of us, but and transforming that data into CRM-based RDF with a proprietary system that they have developed at USC. That tool is called Karma, and that's basically the process, right?
Pretty much. Each institution is exporting data from their collection management systems into formats that can be digested into this tool, and then David will show you a little later some of the tool that he's developed for the purposes of reviewing and looking at that data and establishing norms, what we call our target data model for that data as it gets converted. So you'll be seeing that. Just be aware that process is happening across all these institutions in parallel with the design and development of the application for consuming that data. Okay. The only other thing is this can be a very open discussion, so if you have questions as you go along, feel free to raise them. If we run into any time issues, then we may defer some questions, but we prefer to have this as a interactive conversation as much as possible. So we appreciate your interest in inviting us to this. So So as Emmanuel said, part of this is sort of born out of frustration with the challenge of finding different kinds of information on different sites in different ways, and then doing a lot of the synthesis work. As scholars, they do a lot of the synthesis work themselves. And so while that's, very positive from the perspective of their ability to handle and manage a lot of information, it's not necessarily very well supported. As we move toward more of an open data approach and people are making data available as you all have, we felt that we needed to rethink some of that. And so there was a Mellon planning grant in 2015 that led to a further Mellon grant and also an IMLS grant to actually explore the conversion of data and the creation of what we actually call a browse application. There are a number of search applications out there. And so we wanted to make sure that we thought beyond search specifically and incorporated that, but really thought more broadly about how people navigate around. And so we've been working with the institutions, gathering some needs analysis around the way different people want to use this information, the kinds of tasks they're performing, and have used that to help with the design of what is essentially going to be an early initial prototype. So this is not by any means at this stage a complete or elaborate application, but it's beginning to point the way toward some of the kinds of things that we want to achieve when we think about how you browse different kinds of information. David, was there anything that you wanted to add into the framing of this before we start looking at things?
No, I think I'm good, thanks. David?
Okay. All right, and David's on mute, but he can jump in anytime as well. So essentially what we've mapped out, as I said, this is a prototype because a lot of the effort is going into having the institutions think about how they want to cross-fertilize their information.
Hey, I can jump in now. I had
All right.
on two different ways. I think that what makes this project so interesting, the browse application in particular, is so many of the linked data projects that we see are really based around the idea of publishing. So the idea is to model and to publish linked data. And what we're noticing is that there's a bunch of things that you have to get right to make that work, but there's an additional set of things that have to work if you want to take the published data and use it on the other end. And what makes the American Art Collaborative such an interesting project, and particularly the browse application, is it's one of these first projects where the reuse of that data is a primary goal. So we're actually trying to round trip this data because you already have the data and you have a website. And so you already know that you have the data, but can you convert it from that data in your collection management system to linked data and then get it back out with enough fidelity to do the same sorts of things that you were doing with it beforehand? It proves that linked data is just as useful as the data that you had beforehand, with all of the added benefits that linked data brings. And so one of our major responsibilities as part of the AAC is to be those advocates for people who want to use the data on the other end. And so being correct is not enough, and so much of the publishing of linked data is around this idea that what's really important is to be correct and to make sure that you've successfully semantically modeled the knowledge that you have. And what we're working on is both that correct modeling, so we understand what the data means, we also have enough of that implicit knowledge that you guys have in your head that other people can understand it. So it's about making sure that the context still exists so that we can use the data on the other end.
That's a really good point. Yes, it's having to think about how to make it practical and approachable as well as complete and rich is very important. The other thing that was very much part of the early planning was to think about the data as something that can grow and evolve as other partners become involved. And so the idea of avoiding the need for it to be strictly an aggregator-based model. So if we think about things like research space, DPLA, the Google Culture Institute, these kinds of things, Europeana, to some extent, they're actually simplifying certain things in order to create harmonization. And as David said, it was partly our goal to be correct in the modeling and complete the richness without necessarily limiting the way that the modeling was established. So this created a lot of interesting demands on the project, and over the course of the next 6 months or so, a lot of these are being documented. We're continuing to elaborate. So what I'm going to show you today is actually a set of wireframes around the browse application. As the data is beginning to come out now, we're beginning to code around that. But I thought it was, we're at the point where we can show you a set of wireframes and talk about the concepts and the approaches that we took to establishing the Browse app and how we've tried to think about it being able to accommodate different uses and different things that may arise over time. So the basic structure of the Browse app is very simple, purposefully so. We wanted to keep it really simple. And the heart of it is really a set of content pages that relate to all the major entities that are handled by the American Art Collaborative data, the data of the 14 partners. And those partners are actually 13 art museums and 1 archives, the Archives of American Art. So it's also pushed us to think about a range of different types of data, pushed us to think about a range of different sizes of institutions and technical capabilities of institutions, everything from small institutions like the National Wildlife Art Museum in Jackson, Wyoming, all the way out to folks like yourselves. So you'll find that the institutions themselves are a natural hub for information, the objects obviously being the center of focus. And then there are also other types of entity pages that will be developed, some over time, locations, people, subjects, the kinds of things that are captured as formal metadata in your collection management systems. And we've been very fortunate that the Getty has been collaborating very actively in, particularly in 2016, with the American Art Collaborative and looking at how to reconcile some of these things against the Getty vocabularies so we can create crosswalks between multiple institutions using the Getty's vocabularies as a focal point for that. So what you see is a fairly simple sitemap centered around the content pages really at the heart of it, and then the ability to generate those out into lists and browse between them, and then also be able to sort of see where you are and maintain an orientation to that. So I'm going to jump right into a general artwork page and show you a little bit of the structure of that. So, and just so you're aware, this menu here on the left is not actually part of the site wireframes, just helps me move around them more easily. So the idea here was to stay as close to a representation of artwork as most institutions have it, the ability to sort of see the work itself, be able to zoom in and drill down in. We're working, David's working closely with Rob Sanderson and others. We're looking at where we may be able to use some of the IIIF capabilities to deal with the images in that side, and that's part of what we're hoping to incorporate. Basic tombstone data that you'll see here. And then over on the right side is a column that we've reserved for interesting kinds of relationships. Now, as you look at these, some of these are going to be fairly simple and fairly straightforward. And then as we learn more about the data, we can begin to elaborate on these and provide more interesting related connections. And the idea is to be able to, very easily pop in, see a few of them, and go out to those list pages and look at more of them. And so the idea is to be able to, at any point in time, browse from where you are to nearby contexts based on the graph in the linked data and see things that have some kind of relationship. Now, in many cases, scholars will be able to see things that they recognize, that they know about, but every once in a while we want to be able to strike these aha moments, things that are less anticipated or expected. So the related columns on the right.
And I think one of the things that's important here is
David, did you want to get closer to your mic? Your sound comes in and out. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on a telephone, so I can't get any closer.
Speak louder.
Gotcha. One of the things that makes this related column interesting is because we don't have homogeneous data, because our data comes from many different institutions, we can't be, comprehensive about these relationships because we don't know that there's going to be enough data from any one institution to make all of these links useful or contextual. And so one of the things, and because we're not a museum where we have to provide full context for everything, we can't be definitive the way that a museum collection website can be definitive. And so what we're trying to do here is say, here are interesting things to explore. Here are possibilities of things that might be relevant. So it is more that attempt to be serendipitous, to be to open up avenues that may not be obvious to people, rather than to be comprehensive and definitive. Because when you're dealing with 14 different institutions with 14 different kinds of data, you can learn new things, but you can't guarantee that everyone is going to get to the same standard. And so the whole design of this site is around that idea that we're going to do our very best to show you the most interesting things we can about any one artwork or other kind of entity, but not everything that we know about it, because one thing is we have huge amounts of data because of the different institutions, and the data comes in different qualities, and different institutions are better at different things. And so it's not, here's every possible relationship, and we're going to show you all of them. We're going to show you ones that have interesting and substantial content in the context of this particular work.
Great. the other area where we're taking that principle that David just described is down below that area with the tombstone and the image and the related are what David coined the phrase, the toy box. And essentially the page is laid out in a manner with horizontal sections. And each horizontal section can present a different kind of view on the information based, as he said, on what is available. So the idea of the toy box is twofold, one of which is that any one individual little function will only appear if the data for that work or that artist or whatever is actually available and viable to be presented. So not everything, not every component will show up on every page. The other thing, though, is we're designing it and developing it in a way that will allow other developers who have interesting ideas for things that they might want to do with the data to be able to add toy box items into the app environment. So if somebody says, I mean, I think the wildest one we've ever heard is the zombie detector to identify someone over a certain age who does not have a death date associated with them, and so therefore they must be out there as a zombie somewhere. But whatever ideas different developers may have, we have a few developers within the AAC community who are interested in exploring this, as long as they can work with the data and establish criteria for what data needs to be there for a toy to show up. This thing can be expanded and extended, which is why we've created this horizontal format that can continue to extend further down into the page if additional capabilities become available over time. So we wanted to be able to make the design of the pages flexible for different kinds of situations and expectations. The other thing we wanted to do, you'll notice at the bottom here in the archives area, was make sure that wherever possible, archives information was bound to the works, even if they're coming across different institutions. So the Archives of American Art has oral history recordings with many American artists. There are correspondences and other kinds of things. And we wanted to be able to have those associate in by virtue of their connections through the different kinds of works. So the toy box and these different kinds of related information relationships was very important. In order to maintain the approach of using these horizontal panels, we also are anticipating creating some scrollability in those to allow for some scaling, because sometimes we'll get small numbers of items, sometimes we'll get large numbers of items. And so we wanted to try and make it flexible to handle different amounts of information and presentation. You'll notice here also the idea of being able to pull in information from other quarters. For example, if the National Archives has a categorization scheme based around eras, or the Wikidata has established various categorizations around eras, then maybe we can overlay those with the works of a particular artist at a particular time and see them in different ways. So we're trying to leave the door open to, again, this idea of discovery and serendipity where we can find it. So that's the artwork page. I'm just going to jump briefly over to the artist page. And again, these are wireframes, but we took the same approach through all of them to be able to show that there are different kinds of information that may be available. So for example, with artists, you may want to introduce themes as a way of representing and presenting as sort of a tag cloud model. So there's all sorts of different things that we can do. We're building some very basic foundations. Each one of these little toy items is a component that we hope to be able to use in different ways, and then discover what we can learn across the 14 data sets as they begin to interact with. People begin to interact with it. So one of the other things then that that we wanted to try and do to help with discovery was to look at how things are related to each other as well. So for example, one of the things that we wanted to explore was what would it be like if we compared objects? So you may see an object on one website and explore it in detail and read things about it, and then you go off to another website and compare it. But how can we make that process of discovery a little more efficient and effective? So we have a layout here that we've been experimenting with for the purposes of encouraging that kind of comparison. And at this point in the design, we focus on comparing two items in a side-by-side format. Obviously, there may be other kinds of patterns we'll want to extend to compare more, but we felt that actually capturing a nice, comfortable, very easy to read, highly visual side-by-side comparison will give people the ability to spot things easily that may be of interest. So we use the tombstone data in a kind of center column format. And then as you go down the center column, where it's necessary in the case of like shared palette or shared themes, is things that are common to both the works. Whereas then things that are in the left column under one or the right column under the other are unique to that work. We've also been looking at the question of how to do comparison of sizes, because we know that's really important and in some cases fairly complex. And we're exploring the idea of using 5 or 6 or 7 sort of common icon shapes. So, so keeping it very, very simple and scalable rather than attempting to accurately represent all of the different dimensions that are going to be available in the linked data across all the institutions, to bucket those into areas that will give you a sense of the comparison that's available between them, and then the actual dimension data goes with that. Likewise, where you've seen before the timelines, being able to do something similar where we can do comparison, where we look not only at when something may have been produced by two different artists, but also like where in their career or what kinds of things they were doing and around that at the time. We felt it would be interesting to explore that as well with artists. And so again, we took a fairly visual approach to that, using things like classifications around subject and medium, and quantitatively using the visualizations as ways of helping somebody spot fairly quickly, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know something about this, or I didn't realize they had done that many works of that type. Drawing on the archives, we're also able to see a much broader connection of relationships between people, because there's a lot of this that sits in correspondence or with the involvement of the National Portrait Gallery. There's a lot of people here who may have been subjects in paintings as sitters. And so what we wanted to try and do was just bring those things to the surface across the whole data set.
Wait,
Yes.
we have a couple of questions right now. Would it be
Sure.
a good time to do that?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. So on this wireframe that you're showing right now with the different artists, the data for their subject items in their works, is that data from the linked data from these 14 institutions, or is that data about the works that they've done for like their entire career?
At this point, it's based on whatever we have available to us in the data itself. So one of the things that is still in progress, I mean, all of these things are still concepts in the prototype. One of the things that we've been exploring is reconciliations for the different institutions to where they've used, for example, AAT as part of their subject classifications. Then we're able to bind multiple institutions via those AAT references or via the hierarchy higher up into the AAT references to create cross connections between the institutions. It would be wonderful if resources were available more generally in relation to these artists about all of their works. And as long as those kinds of things are available, we would certainly want to see how they would be able to be represented. But unless they're available as linked data to us right now, we don't really have a good way to do that. That answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions at this point?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So one of the other areas that we want to explore, and I'm not quite sure how far we will get in exploring it, is again drawing in from the archives and looking at correspondence between the artists, where one is corresponding with another and vice versa. And so we think there's a lot of possibility with these things to create entry points for more detailed research than is sometimes easy to do at the moment. So all of these, again, just fall on the same basic principle of taking the data that's available, working with linked data to try and harmonize that data, and using these individual components where they make sense to present information in a way that people can explore. We have just to sort of wrap this one up, there's a number of other things that we've been looking at and thinking about. For example, on the search side, one of the challenges is always how do you present heterogeneous information? So how do you present artists and subjects and artworks and other kinds of things in linked data in the same way? Typically, we see in sites there will be a collections search that focuses on artworks, and then there will be a site-wide search that has other types of information, and there may be an artists area where you can look at them in a list. And so, again, we've been exploring. These are by no means definitive. These are just early some concepts about how we may be able to present different entities like the artists or the media in their own scrollable areas, applying filters at the top as ways of helping people hone in. we think the artworks sort of have a different class to everything else. They have a different level of focus and emphasis for people. So we've, at this point, we're looking at laying them out in a more traditional format in relation to the others, but there's still experimentation going on. So, you know, if you focus in then just on artworks, it will look much more like a typical search interface, various types of controls that you might have for that. The only other thing that we want to try and do as we think about different kinds of entities is entities that may not be artists, but again, being able to potentially treat them in the same way. So with the American Art Collaborative, we think there's an interesting opportunity to look at everywhere that George Washington is a subject and be able to see, for instance, different ways that that subject has been treated over time. So, you know, this is using the same components that we've seen before. We think this is probably a stretch goal. This is probably not going to make it into our first prototype, but the idea of doing some kind of ability to flip through works over time so you can see evolution of things is another area that we're beginning to explore. So what we're trying to do is just take advantage of this rich collection of data from multiple institutions and look at different lenses that help people discover it and help people sort of prod into it and see it maybe in different ways than they've seen it typically at this point. So I think that's pretty much the demo. If you've got any questions on that, and otherwise what we're going to do is have David talk a little bit and show one or two things that we've been doing around the data itself and how we've been managing and handling the data itself. Any questions first?
Well, I think that was great. We're ready for the next part.
All right, David, over to you.
Great. Should I share my screen or?
Either way, you can share your screen or I can pull something up. You ready to share? I can go ahead and just make you a presenter.
Yeah, make me presenter.
All right, there you go.
There we go. So I am one of the, as we've been thinking about how do we actually pull off all of these things that Dwayne's been talking about. And I don't know how much experience you guys have with linked data, but one of the major benefits of it is that it's incredibly flexible. It lets you communicate information with a huge amount of nuance. And that's also one of the major problems with linked data is, as I'm sure anyone who's ever done scholarly work, everybody has their own opinion as to the best and most appropriate way to communicate knowledge. And so one of the things that we've discovered we need as we talk about mapping linked data is that we need to start thinking about profiles, which is to say that we need to come up with a consistent way in which you can map your linked data. And this is not saying this is a definitive way that everyone should do it, or even that this is the only thing that you should add. But what we're saying is that if you're interested, if you want to sort of play in our sandbox, it's helpful to think that this is how we interpret major common subject terms. And we're pulling from lots of legacy work that's been going on for decades in the museum community, like CDWA. And so what we said, because we went through the data that all of the different 14 partners were providing and said, what are the common conceptual buckets that they're putting data in? Things like primary titles or alternate titles, credit lines, acquisition dates, descriptions, styles. And what we said is, if we were interested in modeling this particular concept that museum people understand, what would be a reasonable way to do that using the theorem? And we pulled from a lot from the existing work that you guys have done at YCBA, that the Smithsonian Art Museum has done, the British Museum has done. And what we said is, for a primary title, what we'd like to do is, here's a very particular model of how you would model that concept. You know, we'd have a text and we'd have a class. And what this actually does is, this tool is designed to say, to help people who are modeling their data say, I know what my credit line looks like, but I'm not 100% sure what the best way to model a credit line would look like. And I know what a so for that person, it's the, I have a credit line. Oh, I've got my art object. It's referred to by a piece of text. That text is an acknowledgement, and here's where the actual text goes. And so this helps the person who's doing the modeling say, here's a target modeling for the AAC profile of linked data. And the other thing this does is, if I've got this particular object, can I check to see whether or not it works? And so what this is doing is checking that round trip that we have. And so the data is exported from the institution. The people who are doing the modeling go through, they model it using this into raw linked data, which looks very much like this, which is, I can barely read this. This is meaningless to almost anyone. And so what we do is say, okay, if I try to do that round trip that we were talking about earlier, if I go and I try to ask that giant triple store of linked data that's sitting out there somewhere for this information back, do I get the information that I think I put in? Which really just means, is this actually the credit line for this work of art? And so this has been one of the major things that we discovered is really, really helpful for people who are doing this work. This wasn't in our original design description, but we discovered we needed it so that everyone stays on the same page. And so what we've done is we've identified about 30 or 40 different pieces of data that are used by museums. And we keep adding to this as we discover, from addition to museums, new pieces of information. And so what this review tool has been helpful in letting us do is you let each of the different people who are involved with this data check that it works all the way through. Because sometimes, you know, so much of this work, we make mistakes and we misinterpret what the data means that's been provided. Or we make a typo in the mapping, or we make a typo in the querying for it. And what we know is that if you put the data in and the data comes out here looking the same, all of those steps have been done correctly. And so this is one of the major benefits that I think that we've done for the American Art Collaborative. Dwayne, do you have any input for that?
I think the only thing to add to that is that in going through this process with the partners, and a lot of that discussion with the partners has actually been led by Emmanuel and by Kate Blanche at the Walters, has been this this wonderful internal aha among the partners about what else they might be able to provide. And so what having that collaborative group has done is they're sparking off each other and saying, well, you know, if you're providing this, then we can provide something like that, or we can provide something that will allow us to create a new kind of link that isn't typically done between this bit of information that we have and that bit of information that you have. And so that collaboration, I think, has actually increased the richness of what every institution has done. And as Kate Blanche and I think Sarah Snyder both have been talking a lot about the idea that it's beginning to help them actually start elaborating out data strategies for their individual institutions. And establish some roadmaps for their institutions. So I think it's been very beneficial for a lot of people within the American Art Collaborative to have this visible representation of what it means to map these various elements and to start pushing them to think about what else they might be able to achieve.
The other thing that's been go ahead.
I was just going to say it certainly brought to life, working with data on in a live way. But the other thing I'd mention is that the AAC's goal into this project was not to change any of the cataloging guidelines or practices local to each of the 14 institutions. We're very much working with what we currently have, but certainly collaborating like this in a fashion like that brings some interesting discussions between data people saying, oh yeah, for sure I have that as well, and I could add to it. We've got a couple of questions in the room, so we might take a. Yep.
Great.
Can you say more about how the member institutions are actually going to convert their existing data? Did I understand that you were saying that you're giving them the model of how they will do that conversion, but then is it up to each institution to actually figure out the method of how they're going to get their data converted, or are you inventing a tool that they can use to do that?
The way that the American Art Collaborative is handling that process is the institutions are responsible for exporting their data in some sort of format, whatever. We've had some in spreadsheets, some in XML, some in JSON, whatever they're comfortable with. And there already exists a number of tools that can do this kind of mapping. For the American Art Collaborative, we're using a tool called Karma, and ISI out of California is helping do the actual taking the exported data and mapping it to RDF. I know Emmanuel uses something called 3M. I know Rigetti uses a different tool. I know at Carnegie we use a different tool. There's a bunch of different tools that handle that. And this sort of sits on top of that, because the process of saying this field in my data is going to be transformed into linked data this way, the actual running through all of your data and building linked data out of that needs to sort of depend on each institution. What we're saying is, if you're going to do that process, this is sort of a best form for that data. This is much more like defining a citation format. We're saying here is the equivalent of an Associated Press citation format. So it's not the only, there's lots of different, Word can do that sort of citation thing, or you can do it by hand, or there's online tools to help you. This is much more about what that should look like and how do you check if it worked.
David, if you don't mind, I was going to take the screen back for a minute, just show a diagram that might help explain a little of that.
Please do.
So one of the diagrams that we elaborated out for the project was to sort of look at who was responsible for what throughout the pipeline. And so what we were just showing you, sits over here on the right-hand side in the Browse demo app and the Toybox applets. What David was just showing you, again, sits on the right-hand side out here in the Sparkle Transformation Library and the APIs, which we can get out of the Triple Store. And then, as we said, there's a mapping step that is currently being managed by ISI out at the University of Southern California, using their tool for doing that. And what sits behind that is the thinking and the diagrams that ended up in David's tool, which sit down here in this #2 area. And so there are various different people who have parts, but the goal is to try and bootstrap more institutions. By doing it with 14 institutions, we're running into a number of different issues and considerations. And the more we can share those lessons and the thinking and some of the models, it may help the adoption that other institutions will have. And so part of what we're trying to do is not necessarily say, this is the way you must do it, but at least shorten the learning curve toward whatever works for your particular data. But that's being done not by each institution, but as part of this pipeline process. Other questions?
No. That's a very good way of putting it, by the way, Dwayne, I thought, and I think it's worth mentioning that out of the gate, there were many different levels of comfort with linked data among the 14 AAC partners. So that it's been a very good collaborative learning experience, but also thinking about how to kind of plan for the future for others, for other consortiums, if somebody wanted to learn from that model.
Yeah, and I think what we're beginning to see, certainly in different projects that we're beginning to get involved in, is different institutions have different motivations and different things that they want to focus on in their project portfolios. And as such, the more we have some of these models out there, so, we've been talking with people who are doing a scholarly publishing site, folks who are digitizing a lot of archival materials, folks who are doing integrations with their research room catalog and tying that to their artworks and their artist information, people who are looking at educational curricula. And so one of the benefits that we're finding in being involved with AAC, but also beginning to be involved in some of these other kinds of projects, is to be able to say, well, when you're doing the educational curricula, you're going to need to pay attention to the objects that are the focus of that, and all of that, how you represent objects and the metadata for objects. You don't have to make that a prerequisite into your project, because there's some thinking that's already been done there, and so you're building on an extension to that other person's house, essentially. That's a really lousy metaphor, I just realized. But anyway, I think you get the idea, that we're trying to think about how each of these things form building blocks that enhance other work that gets done as well.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes left. How do you want to go about this?
Are there more questions?
Yeah, if there are more questions, that would be great. If there aren't, I would just be interested in some brief reactions of, impressions of what you're seeing, things that you find intriguing, anything that gives us a little feedback on what you've just seen.
Thank you very much for sharing this. It's really impressive and cool to see. I see that inferencing is on the diagram that's on the screen right now. Are you using reasoning in the application, or do you have plans for that?
I think that for a lot of the things that we're doing, we have to do basic inferencing for inverses, and also for managing class hierarchies. So in the CDOC CRM, we have to deal with the fact that many institutions can differentiate between organizations and people, but when we're querying for that information, we don't want to give two queries, one for people and one for organizations. We want to go up to that higher actor level. And to do that effectively, we have to start using the inferencing that's built in. So I don't think we're doing really complicated inferencing, but we are definitely using it for those sorts of things. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other impressions, comments?
I think it's so cool what you're doing here, and I can already see just from the wireframes what a powerful browse application you've created. Thanks for showing it. It's so cool.
Can I ask one other question about the search interface?
Mm-hmm.
The one that you showed us, it looked like it starts you off in a browse, and then you kind of explore that and refine it maybe. Does this mean that there is no, or am I just missing it? Is there no search box where you enter terms?
No, there would be a search box. There's a small icon here for opening up the search box. Obviously, on the mock-up, we didn't go too deeply into refinement and other aspects of search, but we would expect there to be a search box that you would enter into. But
this means that what we're looking at now really means this is where you start, so you wouldn't have to go to that search box. You could just start browsing.
And that could be possible too. It depends a little bit on the question of scalability. And we want to make sure that people are able to search, but we didn't want to make an assumption that the person coming to this site would clearly know what was available across all the 14 institutions or have a clear idea of exactly what they were looking for. There are certainly scholars that will, but there are others who might need to open up and browse a little more generally. One of the things that we would like to explore in a future version, if we can actually get further support for that, is other kinds of visualizations that show you more of a profile of what information is available within the federated collection. So rather than just seeing these individual instances, 6 artists' pictures that you have to go digging into, to look at some visualizations for that. Because that's really the big challenge with search. You either get the blank search box or you want something to give you a sense of what's there, what your landscape is.
And I think what...
Go ahead.
Especially important for visual materials where starting out and looking at stuff, I mean, actually looking at visual stuff is really important.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think because we're in this weird middle ground where we are not comprehensive, if you know what you want, the institution is the right place to go for it, because they're the comprehensive source of authority for that. But if you're searching for Georgia O'Keeffe, we don't have everything about Georgia O'Keeffe. We just have this subset with the institutions. And so a really strong focus on search would be disingenuous because it wouldn't give people what they expect. But by saying, here are things that are related, and that sort of Wikipedia-style browse, we can give people an experience that is both better, something you can't get from a single institution, but that is, but it doesn't promise more than we can actually deliver.
And I think that's one of the great kind of breakthroughs of the AAC, just thinking about search in such different terms, right? Visually, certainly, and within a world where we don't know what might come up. basically. We don't know, the collections of the other 13 institutions very well. So we're hoping that this will kind of trigger some thoughts and projects for others as well, and kind of venture into creating kind of different search approaches.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so it's 4:01 already, unfortunately. I want to thank you guys very much. That was awesome. Very nicely done. And I'll be sure to follow up with questions and transfer over to you when I get some. Any closing words right now?
Just thank you guys so much for giving me this opportunity to show our work.
Thank you.